Maral Karimi is a faculty lecturer at Toronto Metropolitan University, and Jon Allen is a former Canadian ambassador to Israel and a senior fellow at the University of Toronto's Bill Graham Centre for Contemporary International History. They both join us in studio. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
We're going to talk with the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. He did a press conference this morning. Maral, did anything stand out to you from that?
What Hegseth was talking about was kind of the continuation of what Trump announced at his press conference yesterday. There are two significant aspects. One, he was flip-flopping on regime change, whether or not the United States is going in to actually change the regime, or whether they're going to leave it to people and how that's going. And I think that's quite significant because it points out the uncertainty that is perpetuating within the American administration. They don't know what they're doing yet. And at the same time, I think he was also, both him, Hegseth, and Trump were signaling to the American public that this is not going to be that quick, surgical, clean attack that they had promised. They're in it for the long haul. They're preparing their public for that.
All right, Jon?
Well, at the same time, he went out of his way to say that this is not going to be Iraq. Right. This is not going to be a forever war, because, of course, Donald Trump came in saying there will be no more forever wars for America. So he's trying to play both sides. And at one point, he actually said that we've effected regime change, even though I think what he was talking about is they've assassinated Khamenei and the defense minister and others, but clearly there has not been the kind of regime change that either Israel or the Americans are looking for.
Very quickly, there are midterm elections coming up in the U.S. Does this play into any of that, Jon?
Well, there are midterm elections coming up in the U.S., and there are national elections coming up in Israel. For Bibi Netanyahu, this is a positive. There will be a rallying around the flag, and his numbers will probably go up. If the war lasts, as you've suggested, then this could be a real problem for Donald Trump, both because his base is not keen on these foreign interventions. If there are American lives lost more than already, this could be a problem for Donald Trump.
Maral, was it ever realistic to think that the U.S. could pressure Iran into submission using threats or limited strikes without triggering sort of a wider regional war?
I don't think it was, and which is why throughout the different administrations, from Bush, Obama, Biden, and now Trump onward, they've been trying to kind of come up with some sort of a deal with Iran. Because this is especially true post-2009 uprisings in Iran, the Green Movement there, where the IRGC kind of realized...
IRGC, for people who aren't...
the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the actual target of Trump at the moment. So Iran has two of these, the IRGC, and then there's the national military. So the IRGC found it a stronger foothold, both in the economy. They decidedly and systematically went into the economy, and also cultural productions, movies, concerts, et cetera, to perpetuate that nationalist and strengthen the nationalist ideology. And at the same time, they have this military might. So the Americans understand that to some extent, or at least did before Trump. And so they were trying, that's why Obama came up with the JCPOA, that deal, the nuclear deal with Iran, which Trump canceled. It was never going to be this easy. And many Americans knew this.
Jon?
I agree. The idea that they were somehow going to force a very ideologically driven anti-American, anti-Israel regime with a couple of quick shots to change overnight, to give up what they've been fighting for 47 years, was highly unlikely. And I think they were perhaps hoping that they could negotiate something, but the terms they were trying to negotiate, the end of nuclear, the end of ballistics, the end of support for proxies, wasn't something that Iran was going to agree to either. They might have agreed on the margins, but they were never going to agree to give up all of their defenses. So I think this was kind of unrealistic from the beginning, and maybe the Americans knew it. I think the Israelis certainly knew it.
Maral, can you talk to us about the contrasting emotions among Iranians right now?
Khamenei, the supreme leader's death came on Saturday. There were so many videos and people dancing, and there was an outpouring of joy. But the next morning, as soon as the sun came up in Iran, we also saw so many thousands of people across the nation taking out to the streets in mourning. So what I would like your viewers to always remember, and this is something that is often missed in the media, is that Iran is not a monolith. Mm-hmm. So those people mourning for Khamenei are Iranians, the people, part of the people, and the people who are supporting Reza Pahlavi and the monarchy are another. Some people support the MEK, the former, the Mujahideen Khalq, or which are designated as a terrorist group, but they're well organized and well armed. Or, there are others that don't have as big of a voice, but they're the more democratic leaning Iranians.
Jon, some say that the Ayatollah's death could be the biggest threat Iran's Islamist regime has seen in its 50 years. But that doesn't mean that the theocracy is going to collapse overnight, does it?
No, it doesn't. The supreme leader was very old. He was not well. He was not going to last forever. And the fact that he's gone now doesn't mean that there is massive regime change at all. The vacuum is being filled as we speak. There's a transitional force that's in power that will choose the ultimate supreme leader, etc. And I don't see any significant changes as a result of this assassination, notwithstanding what Hegseth and Trump are suggesting.
All right. Canada's response in support of the U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran has received a fair bit of criticism. I want to read a quote. This is from Canada's former Foreign Minister, Mr. Lloyd Axworthy. He writes, "We invoke international law and the rules-based international order when adversaries engage in unlawful actions, but abandon those same rules entirely when it's the Americans, whose current government 60% of Canadians now see as a threat during the bombing. For a country that depends on law more than force for its own security, that is not realism, it is recklessness." Maral, I'll come to you. Your thoughts on that? Agree, disagree? Is Canada abandoning international law?
On a moral and ethical stance, I absolutely do agree with them. But at the same time, I understand that Prime Minister Carney might, he's walking a very fine line because we're still dealing on the trades file with the Americans. There is that, and we know Donald Trump is not the most open person, shall we say, to criticism, especially from Mark Carney. And so I to some extent, I understand why Carney would phrase the way he phrased his statement. But at the same time, he also specifically, I think this was somewhat smart, because he said, we support the United States, the attack on the nuclear facilities. He left a lot out, and he left some room for himself to later on to come out and say, well, we don't support every other thing, and like some leeway for himself there.
Jon?
I was very surprised at how fast and how full-throated his support for Donald Trump and the attack was. As the former foreign minister suggests, when you attack another country, there are restrictions on that in the UN Charter. You're either doing so because you've been attacked and you're responding, or because there's an imminent threat that you're going to be attacked and you're responding, or because you have a United Nations Security Council authorization. None of those conditions existed here. Neither Israel or the Americans were under imminent threat, and they had not been attacked, and they were not going to be attacked, given the weaknesses of the Iranian regime at this point in time. And there was no Security Council resolution. So the Europeans were more nuanced. They didn't come out against it. But certainly Axworthy's right. I don't feel comfortable, particularly with Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu deciding who are the good guys and the bad guys in this world and who we can attack and who we can't attack. I would rather have some resort to international law.
Jon, I'll stick with you. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand declined to comment on whether Canada sees these strikes on Iran as a violation of international law. Your thoughts?
I think she declined to say anything because she knows that these were a violation of international law. And I agree that it's a difficult position for the Prime Minister. He's got CUMSA negotiations coming up. But I was, as I said, surprised at how fast and how fully he supported it without a nod to the kind of multilateralism and concern for middle powers that he's now become famous for as a result of his Davos speech.
Maral, just this weekend, a boxing gym in Thornhill, Ontario, owned by a prominent Iranian-Canadian activist, was attacked. 17 bullets, I believe, at last count. Can you talk to us about the possibility of the Islamic regime targeting members of the Iranian diaspora here?
Well, the Iranian regime has a long history, almost of extraterritorial attacks on its opponents. A history almost as long as its life, as long as it existed. There have been assassinations, particularly on the Kurdish diaspora, the Kurdish opposition in Europe and in other parts of the world. Just a few years ago, there was an assassination attempt on the life of a prominent activist in the United States that was intercepted by the FBI. The assassination attempt on Donald Trump. So it is a long history, but it's not just assassination and physical violence that is perpetuated by the Islamic regime in order to marginalize their opponents. They systematically try to buy the opponents, displace them, and kind of marginalize them in academia and in media through their lobbies.
Everything that we've discussed so far, I want to get a better understanding of what is the best case and worst case scenarios for Iran going forward. Jon?
Well, the worst case scenario is the regime essentially stays in place. They're increasingly concerned about any kind of threat. Violence and instability continue. We have a prolonged war that causes instability in the region. The best case scenario is that this somehow causes divisions within Iran, that various forces begin competing with each other, and as a result, there's a weakening of the regime and some decay. And I guess the other best case scenario is that in the diaspora, Iranians come together, unify, and present themselves with a unified position that could offer a transitional government going forward, so that there is somebody that could actually take over if and when this regime begins to disintegrate.
Maral, you get the last word.
I think, if anything, this is going to be most probably a transformation from within the regime. The conditions for having it, and I understand, Jon, and I agree with it. I wish there could be a way for the diaspora to come together, but the conditions for that are, unlike in 1979, are not there. And many of these diaspora leaders don't have the necessary networks on the ground in Iran. Some have, others have the necessary networks, such as the MEK. They don't have the popular support. Reza Pahlavi has some popular support, particularly in the diaspora. They don't have. And then there are, I would say this, and as my last word, there are certain Democratic, Republican-leaning groups that are coming out and that have been working underground all these years, and they're coming up, and we'll wait and see what they would do and how they are going to organize.
And that is what we will have to do. Maral, Jon, I really appreciate your insights and your takes on this. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having us.